Good morning. It's Friday morning, and we've got some good news for you today. We have a pastor, a business leader, a best-selling author. Rick McDaniel is here with us this morning. Rick, I'm so excited to have you. Welcome.
Good to be with you today, Beth.
I found Rick on a Bible app. I was doing a Bible study, and he popped up, and I think he did the word of the day or something. I dug a little deeper and reached out to him several weeks ago thinking I really want to talk to him because I love the topics of his books. And so we're going to talk about some of that today. So, Rick, we're going to talk about, first of all, you started a church, 23, 24 years ago
Actually,
in
30
Virginia?
years ago. 30 years ago.
30 years ago.
30 years ago, yep.
And so what made you start a church? Not many people wake up and say, I'll start a church today. What happened?
Yeah, that's a long story. So how can I give a short answer? The short answer would be 30 years ago, I felt like that church needed to change and become more relevant and contemporary. Now, that sounds funny now because so many churches are that way, but again, go back 30 years and that's not how it was. And so I said, I'm going to start a church that is more relevant, that would have a live band, that would be more casual in its dress, and ultimately ended up with, the screens and video and all those things through the years. But it started with a vision to reach people who weren't going to church, to reach a younger generation of people that needed to be introduced to the gospel. And that's what got me to do that. And then I wrote an article about it, and a guy read it, and he ended up being instrumental in me coming to Richmond, Virginia, and to a growing suburb at that time called Glen Allen. And that's how I started the church.
So what did you learn? You pastored for years, decades. Plus you speak in the business industry, and what we talked a little bit before is, those two worlds can come together in such a way. But what did you learn from pastoring, from starting a church, from doing it different, from coming out with a different view of, okay, I'm not going to do it like everybody else is doing. I feel like I'm going to do it, and reach people that may otherwise not come. What did you learn through that process? Because I have a feeling that fueled most of your books.
Well, I learned, first of all, that just like in the business world, innovation is vital. And we have the greatest message in the world. The gospel is the greatest message, but it can not be heard if people aren't receiving it and can't receive it in a way that makes sense to them, that's relatable, practical, relevant. So I learned a lot about how to do that, how to reach people. I also learned that people need encouragement. They need hope. And that if you don't offer them hope, which again, the gospel message is at its core, a message of incredible hope that we might be able to be forgiven of our sins. We might have a relationship with God, that God has a plan for our lives, that we can live an abundant life. You can't get much more hopeful than that. But again, people need to hear it. So that was another thing I learned. Now, again, I could go on and on. I learned a lot about leadership, about how you have to lead people well in order for people to, again, be able to gather in larger numbers. Many churches are small for a reason. If you're going to reach a lot of people, you've got to use leadership principles, some of which, by the way, work very well in business as well. Most do.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. People need encouragement, because you've seen that. I mean, that was then, over 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at now, people don't just need encouragement. People are starving for encouragement.
Yes.
And I think that we've taken the gospel message and we've made it so complicated that we forget that it's invitation to everyone. And a lot of people don't believe God has a plan and purpose for their life. So how did you convince people to really grab a hold of that? Because most people think that's for Christian people, like, big pastors and stuff like that. But it's for every person, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It's for every person. And actually, I find it very easy to convince because the Bible is a textbook for life.
Yeah.
It has incredible guidance and wisdom and principles. So I basically based my preaching, speaking ministry on extracting out of the Bible principles. I would call it life application. Here's the
Mm-hmm.
principles. Here's how you can apply it to your life. And what happened is people are like, wow, I never knew the Bible even talked about that. I never knew the Bible talked about that. Wow, these principles. I would have business people tell me that on Monday morning, they would gather with their staff and they would repeat things that I said in services on Sunday that were in a church environment, but the principles work in life, in sports, which is my background before becoming a pastor, in business, and again, law, medicine, whatever, healthcare, education, wherever you want to go. So I just love how the Bible is full of principles, and I think it's practical. And I developed over time, the ability to take those principles, which then led me to writing books because again, the books allow for a larger reach than maybe just a local church, even though I had a broadcast ministry in other ways. And eventually it led me to leave the baby that I founded and cared for all those years so that I could do reading plans and verse of the day on the Bible app. So I could do a show on the Pray app. So I could write articles for Fox News. I have one coming out on Sunday about unity in our country. And give me an opportunity to do other things to expand the message to an even larger audience, which I'm thankful to say is what I've been able to do.
And you've traveled several continents. You've traveled the United States. You've been around the world with your messages, with your books. And let's talk about that topic of unity. What does everyone of all those places that you've been have in common? Where's the common ground that we should all be, okay, here's where we start, and then let's go from there? What do you find to be that commonality in all the places or most of the places that you've been?
Yeah. So again, all 50 states, 40 countries, 6 continents. So I have been a lot of places and
That is a lot of
met a
places.
lot of different kinds of people, third world countries, metropolitan, cosmopolitan cities. So first thing I would say, and I is the first thing that comes to my mind. It's not very spiritual in one sense, but it's very in another, is everyone loves their family.
Yeah.
Everyone loves their family. People care about their family. They want what's best for their family. Parents love their children. They want what's best for them. So I found that no matter where you go, and I mean the poorest place in the world, in South America or Africa, the biggest, fanciest resort and place in the biggest city, you'll find people love their families. They love their families. So they love their families and they want to do anything they can to help them. And there's no greater way to help your family than to tell them about God's love for them and about God's plan for their life. Again, back to the hope message, people have a lot of problems that they encounter. I like to call them challenges rather than problems, and they need help overcoming those challenges. And I discovered that when you give people answers to their challenges, when you make sure that they know that you care about them, their relationships that are important to them, you can do a lot of good in this world.
Yes, you can do a lot of good. Let's talk about that, because really families and whether it be extension of our families and our communities and relationships, you talk about communication. And in our world, we're becoming less good at communication because we're really good at, this, and,
Right.
high little snippets of communication, but the depth of communication is, I think, what people are missing. So how do you get people to stay connected to those family members, to stay connected to those community members, and not miss the part of that one-on-one relationship because I think that's what causes people to be so um, unhappy, unfulfilled feeling is, like, what does my life really matter? And it does go back to the depth of those relationships. Is that right?
Yeah, of course, yes, it's right. But again, that relationship with God is crucial to get
Yeah.
meaning and purpose in life, not just the family relationships. Um, but I do think that we're back to this whole thing that God has put me on this earth to do, which is to inspire people, to encourage them, to motivate them, to want to do the things that maybe they know they should do, but struggle to do, to get them to have family dinners together instead of just everyone going a million miles an hour in a million different directions, to try to get off these devices and just spend time with each other, and to really show their love for one another in more practical ways, and then to support one another through the inevitable challenges that we all face. And this is where this comeback message in this 2 books I've written on comebacks, and why so many people I've been interviewed and had so many interactions with people in the media over comebacks, is because there are, of course, all kinds. You can have you can need a relationship comeback from a relationship setback, health, finances, career, spiritual, across the board it goes. And so helping people to have comebacks is something that God has uniquely encouraged me and motivated me to do.
So when you had a setback, you've missed a job opportunity, you've gotten a bad diagnosis, you felt like something God called you to do was going to happen, it didn't. We perceive those as setbacks. Well, how do we then take that perception and say, okay, I'm going to set myself up for a comeback? Because we do have to do the work. We can't just sit around and wait on God to come knocking on the door, right? We've got to go do the good works God planned in advance for us to do. So how do
Correct.
you tell people to, all right, if you want to come back, go do these things and see that come to fruition?
Yeah. So first of all, you said several things. You say we perceive those as comebacks, and I just want to say those are comebacks. Okay, those are setbacks. You perceive them as setbacks; they are setbacks,
Yeah.
and there's does you no good to deny that. It's
Yeah.
just okay. This is a setback. Okay, I didn't get the promotion that I wanted. My spouse just walked out the door on me. There's no way to put lipstick on a pig and say, "Oh, everything's fine." No, this is a setback. So it's
Yeah.
always important to just be able to own it, to be able to say that's what it is. And there's lessons to learn from a setback. And of course, this is the whole reason why I wrote Turn Your Setbacks into Comebacks, is to literally walk people through some of the steps that you would take to have a comeback. But just for instance, a few things that are really vitally important. One would be exiting survival mode. When we have a setback, we get into survival mode. We have to survive. However, you can't stay in survival mode. You have to shift from survival to thriving. And that is enormously important to get out of survival mode. Another is setback mentality. You have to lose that. Again, if you're not careful, your whole mindset will just be, this happened to me, this is unfair, I was wronged, or I screwed up, I messed up. However you want to look at it, whether you beat yourself up or you have a pity party about where you were wronged, at the end of the day, that mentality must shift to a comeback mentality, or you'll stay in the setback. So there are people right now today watching, listening, who are in the middle of a setback and can have a comeback, but it will take steps. It will take certain components that you have to put into the process. And really what I discovered is, the more I wrote 1 book, then I wrote a 2nd book, because there's so much information really and content to delve into when you talk about this subject of setbacks and comebacks. But I can tell you this one thing for certain, for absolutely certain. The pivot point where you move from a setback to a comeback is this: change. You keep doing what you've always done, you'll keep getting what you've always gotten. Okay. Definition of an insanity: doing the same thing, expecting different results.
Yeah.
So change, and it has to be a change of mind, a change of heart, and a change of action. All those components have to be in there. So wishing is not going to get you into a comeback. Changing will, taking the right steps. And I'm going to tell you what, it happens. It happens all the time. I am a collector of comeback stories. I can tell you many, 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 and they're
me too.
super exciting.
Well, so take that mentality shift, and sometimes we're like, okay, we move out of that fight or flight mentality, and we're like, okay, strategic. All right, I've got to be strategic. I'm going to make some decisions so I can list my changes. What's the best way to really decide what's next? I mean, we pray about it. I mean, how does God lead people to make, do I take this job? Do I take that job? Do I move to this city? Do I move to that city? I think people struggle with the day-to-day. Okay, I asked God, I didn't hear from anything. I don't know what to do. I'm just going to do. How do you help people to really listen while at the same time not getting stuck waiting on like a telegram or an email from God saying, go do this for the rest of your life? Because I think people get stuck there.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. Okay, there's a very interesting little scripture in the Bible. It says, "Watch and pray." Watch and pray. Not just pray, watch and pray.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to pray, you better be watching, because God will be talking, and He can talk through circumstances and events. So you pray and you watch. The second thing, let's go back to now to the praying part, is pray for a comeback. In other words, pray for things like God's blessing, God's favor.
Yeah.
And then pray for God to expand your territory, to increase your influence and impact. Pray for God to do that. Then watch and see what He might do when you pray that way. Something's going to happen. It's going to. It may be big, it may be small, it may be medium. I don't know, but something's going to happen. And then you've got to respond to that. You have to take a small human step. God will take a giant God step. You need to be able to do. I always say, when we do all we can do, God does what only He can do. Yeah. We have to do all we can do. Then God will do what only He can do. So you're praying, you're asking, you're watching, then you're acting upon what opportunities come your way. Then God is blessing that. Then what happens, and this is why the sports world of comebacks is good, because in sports, a comeback is about momentum. And you can have personal momentum just like a team can have momentum.
Mm-hmm.
I was with John Maxwell, this is years ago, like 20-something years ago. And he said, momentum is your best friend because it makes you better than you are. I never forgot that. I believe that all the way. You can get on a roll and things just start to happen.
Yeah.
And God is just doing it. And what you just need to do is just keep moving with it. So, momentum there in the Turn Your Setbacks to Comebacks book, I break this down in great detail, about like how momentum happens, and because it's a bit of a formula. It's formulatic more than it is. Maybe people just think, oh, it just magically happens, but there's things we have to do. But once it happens, you've got to act and take advantage of it. Yeah. People that do, wow, they have some pretty great things happen in their lives.
And so let's talk about the life of, God's called me to do this, or God's called me to do that. Maybe I'm in the business world. Maybe I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. I want that change. I just don't know what that looks like. You got people all over the spectrum with questions. And you talk about high impact living, and your podcast is Point of Impact. So let's talk about what it looks like. I mean, everybody wants to live a high impact life. We want to impact other people. Yes. Starting with what we talked about earlier, our families, and then our offices, and then the people in our circle. What does it look like to be that high impact person every day, because we are going to have setbacks. We are going to have disappointments. We're going to have crushing lows, and still our life is having an impact. So how do you help people through your podcast to remember you're a high impact person regardless of what's going on around you, and how does that person act and react every day?
Okay. One thing I would say is I just am just starting on the book that is going to literally break this all down. It's the book I've worked, my whole life to finally write. I have a new book coming out called Greater in November. That's already done. But this is the book where I'm going to lay out in great detail every answer to everything that you just said. But in the meantime, here's what I would say. In something like the Point of Impact podcast, what I'm trying to do is look at subjects like happiness, success. Those are two of my favorites. Influence, and show. I'm a big believer in, it's just the way, my mind works. If you look at the episodes, you'll see it's 10 ways to do. It's 5, it's 10. I like the numbers. I like the lists. 10 morning habits to make you successful, so and it's very practical.
Yeah.
It's, I have the quote unquote credentials, 3 degrees, blah, blah, blah. I'm a scholar in terms of what the academic world would look at. I actually was a professor way, way back, very briefly. So I have all that, but I am not interested in trying to give people a bunch of intellectual information to pass along to make their heads full of knowledge. I am a believer in the practical, in steps that you can take. So my podcast is very practical. If you want to know how to be happy, successful, have influence, have a comeback, those episodes are there all the time. I break it down very simply. You know exactly what to do. I think one of the worst things that can happen is for someone to say, go to church and listen to a sermon by a pastor who has worked very hard to put it together. But at the end of the day, when they walk out, they have nothing to apply to their life between that Sunday and the next Sunday. They've learned some things, maybe they know some things, but it's got to be applicable. It's got to be practical. And so the podcast is exceptionally practical in nature. It will help you. If you listen, you will be helped.
So let's talk about that word happiness, because everybody wants to be happy. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Everybody wants to be happy.
Yep.
And I believe happiness comes more from who you are than what you do. So I like to say God didn't create us to be human doings. He made us human beings. If we know who we are and love and accept and wave goodbye to who we're not, and let them go, and all those people go, and get really right with who we are, then I think we know a whole lot more about what to then do. What are your thoughts on this identity crisis in the nation, these influencers everywhere telling you to think this and buy that? I mean, we got to shut that down if we really want to be our best self, because we got one life, and this is not a dress rehearsal, right?
Yes, I am a huge believer in the your one and only life concept.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'll write a book someday called Your One and Only Life, because you only get one. And there's no repeats, and there's no such thing.
You don't get a day back. You don't get a minute back. You don't get an hour back. You don't get any of it back.
Right. Once the day's over, I heard Billy Graham say this one time, the bank of time closes every day, no deposits, stay, it's done. So you've got to be able to know, okay, I got to live this life of mine, because there's no reincarnation, none of that. It's this one time. And that's really important for people to get, because then maybe they'll start taking action and doing things, because this is it. Once this life is done. And I talk to people all the time about having no regrets, about living life to the fullest, because if you don't do it and then you wish you did, I'm not going to live my life that way. I can tell you that. I get the end of my life, I'm going to say I gave it all. I did what I believe God wanted me to do. I do believe, again, this is such a huge subject, but I do believe very much in terms of happiness that it does begin with mindset. And one of those reading plans, the most popular on the YouVersion Bible app of all the 8 plans, is the one called Mindset Matters. And I'm not surprised by that at all, because it makes perfect sense. Because people, it's really, be careful how you think, the Bible says in Proverbs 4. Your thoughts determine your life. So you've got to think right about who you are, about who God is. That's where it all starts. And if you get your thinking right, that is a huge part of the battle to happiness. Now, and by the way, totally believe human beings, not human doings. I'll just simply say this, though. There is something to doing, and there is something to the happiness that comes from accomplishment, from doing things. But that can't be the beginning point. That's like the outflow of what starts in the mind, and then it flows out into your actions.
I agree with that. And I think it's equally important, but I think you got to go back to who you are, because God created you. And yeah, you get married and you have babies and you do all these things, and these relationships and all that affects you. But I think people lose themselves in roles, responsibilities, and things like that. And I always say, have an invited identity crisis. If you're not sure who you are, great. Then go back to that question. Who am I? What is my goal right now for from here moving forward? Because I think sometimes asking the tough questions really is the best thing we can do. If you're having a setback, then that's the best place to really dig deep and ask the tough questions. Isn't that a part of it, pulling out of that hole?
Absolutely. I am a huge believer in asking questions. I have all kinds of lists of questions. I am Bob Beal, another person who influenced me greatly many years ago, who was sort of the original questions guy. I mean, he'd write these entire books that were full of question after question after question. And I believe, yes, it's great to ask yourself penetrating questions and really ponder and consider, the unexamined life is not worth living. So let's examine our lives. Let's reflect on it. Let's obviously look at what the Bible has to say. Let's be informed scripturally. Let's take an honest inventory of ourselves. I used to have a famous message called The First Choice for Happiness. The first choice for happiness is being honest with yourself. That message was based on when Moses came down from the mountain, and he comes upon this unbelievable scene of debauchery, and he goes to his brother, who's the religious leader, and says, "What is going on? And how did this golden calf, what idols?" And his brother's like, "Gee," and this is in the Bible, right? It's the most incredible thing. He's like, "Yeah, I don't know. It's like we put this gold in and out popped the calf. I mean, what? Like, come on, Aaron, seriously, be honest with yourself." So the first choice for happiness is you have to be honest with yourself. It's a good place to start.
That's right. And you said you don't believe in regret, but where you have mistakes and where you have things in your past that you have done that you're like, man, I wish I'd have never done that, or
right.
I should have, that's okay. Ask that question. Or what are the things that I can best learn from? Because I need to learn from that, because you can carry, I'm a big believer in your past is there for a reason, but carry what you can learn from that into the future, because you've learned lessons, but don't let it drag you back. Right?
Yes.
I mean, that's
yes, absolutely. And there's a whole chapter in the Comebacks book on learning from the lessons of your setback. You must learn from the lessons. When I say live with no regrets, I don't mean you don't have regrets. I mean, your goal in life should be to try to live in such a purposeful way that you don't allow yourself to have regrets. But of course, we all make mistakes. We're not perfect, and we will have regrets. But let me say this. I have left the longer I live, I have less regrets.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, I think that's really good. Let's talk about one final topic. We could talk all day, but nobody would listen. Influence. you talk a lot about influence, and this is the world of influence. We have social media, we have people, everybody's got a book and a podcast. I'm in that same
Right. Yes.
world. It's a great time for opportunities to be able to get your message out there, because there are so many vehicles there. Social media is great for that. Podcasts, books, those are all great. How do you leverage your influence and really, really make sure that you are not trying to be everyone, but really honing in on who God called you to be, and how to be bold in that message, not shrink back, but really step out there and say, man, I'm excited about my life, and I want to tell you why. How important is that understanding of that powerful opportunity to influence others?
Yeah, I am a huge believer in influence, and I believe if there's going to be a lot of what I would consider to be bad influences, that we need to counteract that with good influences. One of the reasons why I decided to make this huge pivot in my life after loving my church and pastoring and all that is because a pastor has to speak on everything: doctrine, giving, serving, relationships. I mean, a good pastor gives you a healthy diet of all spiritual food that you need. However, I do not have to do that any longer. I can focus in. So I believe this is my lane, and I'm there. I am there. If you're looking for inspiration and motivation and encouragement from a faith perspective, I'm your guy. And that's where I'm putting my focus on social media, my books, my podcast, and these other media, these other marvelous opportunities. And even this Fox News piece that comes out on Sunday is me telling a story, because that's kind of what I'm known for, my story-based devotions and telling the story it's the story of a family reunion I just went to. And it's a message on unity. And I'm not a political leader and have no interest in being, but I am someone who wants to encourage and inspire people that we are better together than we are apart. There's more that unites us than divides us. And so even in this unique setting on something like a Fox News, I'm looking to bring that message. So be focused you can't be everything to everybody. Have your lane, know what it is that you are doing and the message you want to share. And I think you can have a pretty significant influence.
And I agree with that. I think having your lane, and sometimes if you're not sure what that is, I like to say, if you're trying to get a bigger picture of the bigger picture, you got to bring your world back and make it a little bit small so you can really seek those questions and answers, and then run your race and get out there and win like you're the one getting the prize, because that's what the Bible says do. Don't sit back and do nothing, go do things. And
Yes.
Once you know those things to go do, because you know who you are, then you run that race like nobody else has ever run that race. And I know you're like, yes, that's right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm 100%, 100%. And that's exactly what I'm doing. That's the way
Right.
I am
right.
pursuing what God has called me to do.
And we'll have to come back and do this again, because I know you talk about marriage. You've been married 30 years, over 30 years. You've got 2 grown kids, and I would love to come back and talk about that topic, because I know that's affects a lot of people. And you talk about the fact that it can be tough, and
Yes.
I think we face the tough. And I
Yes.
think that's whether it's in any relationship. I think that's important. But we'll stop with here today and come back around and do this. And you can get Rick McDaniel's everything on rickmcdaniel.com. He's got Bible apps. He's got 8 books. And you're coming out with a 9th?
Yep, coming out with the 9th one. You can get books on Amazon, that I've written, or you can get them on rickmcdaniel.com, and you can follow me on all the social media channels, which I'm, Instagram, Facebook, X. I'm on all of those. And again, you can get a weekly devotion. A lot of people love it. We send out a weekly devotion every Tuesday morning. You can also go on the Pray app, pray.com. I have over 200 audio devotions, so you could listen if you want to listen instead of reading. So Point of Impact podcast, which is presently out, we're on our summer break. Season 6 will start in September, but there's there's 180 something episodes that you could listen to if you want to go back and listen to them. So lots of resources out there for you. And again, Sunday, you can read the article. It comes out at 10 o'clock in the morning on Eastern time on foxnews.com. So
that'll be great.
Whatever you're interested in, go find it.
You have options. You have options. Yes. So many options, so little time, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Rick, it was so nice to get to meet you and to get to talk to you. I've enjoyed following you. I've enjoyed listening to you. I'm very glad that you're doing what you're doing and that there's a lot of people stepping up and stepping out in their lane and doing it boldly. And I'm glad you're able to come and share with us. And I really would like to come back and talk a little deeper about some of those relationship things at a later point. Sure.
Enjoyed being with you today.
Okay. Everybody have a great weekend. Remember, live your life on purpose. And what is it? If you got a setback, you got to come back coming, right?
That's right. Yes, absolutely.
Right. Good weekend, everybody.
Bye-bye.